had asked me if I'd be interested in doing a project for him. And of course, once I realized that it truly was Boyd, it was like, wow. He was just a small town Idaho boy too.
Boyd Coddington's garage was supposed to remain locked, but they opened it, exposing secrets. It's been abandoned for 6 years after his mysterious death, until collectors finally broke open those rusted doors in 2014. They found 7 half-finished cars covered in dust, blood-stained tools left exactly where they fell, and a leather journal filled with his final desperate words. What was Boyd hiding behind those workshop walls? And why did the truth about America's most famous car builder stay buried for so long? Join us as we find out everything that was found inside Boyd Coddington's garage. Rise of a Legend. Back in 1944, in this tiny farming town called Rupert, Idaho, a kid was born who would end up changing American car culture forever. His name was Boyd Coddington, and honestly, it felt like he came into the world with grease already on his hands. While other kids were out playing with toys or climbing trees, Boyd was tearing engines apart, trying to figure out how stuff worked, imagining wild machines no one had built yet. He was one of those people who just had that touch, like he could shape metal like it was soft clay. His garage wasn't just a workspace, it was basically a lab. Small, messy, always buzzing with the smell of burning metal and the sound of grinding wheels. Most nights, after his regular job, he would vanish into that little space. And hours later, he would come out looking like a mess, covered in dust and oil, but with something amazing halfway built. In the early 70s, he packed up and moved to Southern California. Ended up getting this gig that honestly sounds like something out of a movie, working as a machinist at Disneyland. During the day, he kept the rides running. At night, he had his own thing going on. Back in his garage, he was bringing old car frames back to life, turning them into these futuristic-looking hot rods. Then, in '77, he took a big leap and opened his own shop, Boyd's Wheels. It wasn't huge, but the vision was. Most custom builders back then were all about raw horsepower and flashy chrome. But Boyd was chasing something else. He wanted elegance. He looked at old rusted frames and saw beauty just waiting to be brought out. His cars weren't just fast, they were like moving pieces of art. What really changed the game was when he came up with billet aluminum wheels. No one had seen anything like them before. They were smooth, super precise, and looked like something from another planet. That one idea pretty much shook up the entire custom car world. Suddenly, everyone wanted what Boyd was making. Then the awards started piling up. He won the America's Most Beautiful Roadster Award, and not just once. Big-name celebs started calling. Serious collectors lined up. Even museums wanted his cars for display. But Boyd wasn't just chasing trophies. He had way bigger plans. So when the Discovery Channel came to him in 2004 and pitched the idea for a TV show, he was all in. He saw it as his shot to show the world what custom car building was really about. That show, American Hot Rod, blew up fast. Every week, millions of people tuned in to watch this wild, high-pressure race to build these insane, high-dollar cars on brutal deadlines. And the show didn't hold back. It showed all the sparks flying, the blow-ups in the shop, the victories, the setbacks, everything. Boyd wasn't just a builder anymore. He became a full-on celebrity. People watched him pull these rusted-out wrecks from the grave and turn them into dream cars, sometimes in just a matter of days. But man, the pressure was brutal. Deadlines were tight, and missing one could mean losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. And behind the scenes, things were getting really tense. What used to make the show exciting, the crazy deadlines, the last-minute fixes, the drama, was starting to take a toll on everyone. At first, it felt like adrenaline, but over time, that constant pressure stopped being thrilling and just became exhausting. Boyd's obsession with perfection, which had always been part of what made him a legend, started turning into a double-edged sword. He didn't just want great work, he demanded it. From everyone. Every weld had to be flawless, every part had to fit like it came straight from the factory, even if they were building it from scratch. There were no shortcuts in his shop, and definitely no room for second chances. If something wasn't up to his standard, it got scrapped, no matter how far along it was. That garage, the one that used to be his quiet space to dream and create, basically became a pressure cooker. Cameras were always rolling, which meant there was no time to pause, breathe, or figure things out in private. Everything was for the show now, and the deadlines? Brutal. One project would barely be out the door before the next one was already behind schedule. Sure, the money was coming in faster than ever. The show was a hit, sponsors were happy, orders were piling up, but none of that made it easier. If anything, it just raised the stakes. Everyone was working longer hours, making bigger promises, and hoping nothing would fall apart. But it was getting harder to keep up. The stress started showing, snapped tempers, tired eyes, mistakes that never used to happen. The shop was still building beautiful cars, but under the surface, things were starting to crack. And the worst part was, there wasn't any time to fix it. The show had to go on. To the outside world, everything looked perfect. Gorgeous cars, booming business, dream life, right? But behind all that shiny paint and polished chrome, things were unraveling. The late-night phone calls, the bills were stacking up, the friendships and work relationships that were starting to fall apart. Boyd could turn metal into something beautiful, but keeping his own life from falling apart was getting harder and harder. And those cracks were just the beginning, because the stuff investigators would find years later in that locked-up garage, it didn't just come out of nowhere. The signs were already there. Boyd was on top of the world, but he was also heading straight toward a drop he didn't even see coming. What viewers saw on television was carefully edited magic. But inside Boyd's shop, something dark was taking root. What was it? Behind the cameras. The American hot rod cameras caught all the chaos, sparks flying, people scrambling, and everyone racing to meet deadlines that felt impossible. Millions tuned in to see Boyd turn chunks of metal into jaw-dropping cars, all while the clock ticked. But the cameras never stuck around long enough to show what went down after the lights turned off. One by one, his best builders started leaving. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal, just a couple of guys moving on, which happens in any shop. But then it kept happening. More and more of his core team, the people who had been with him for years, started walking away. Some gave notice, some didn't even bother. A few just dropped their tools in the middle of a build and never came back. Projects were left half-finished, parts scattered on the floor, like they had hit their limit and decided they were done. No warning, no goodbye. It got so bad that Boyd couldn't even keep track of who was still working there. Faces changed constantly. One would see someone new one week, and by the next, they were gone. He'd bring in fresh talent, young builders who were excited to learn from a legend, ready to prove themselves. But the excitement didn't last. Most of them burned out fast. The pace was brutal, the pressure non-stop, and Boyd's expectations were sky-high. What looked like a dream gig on TV turned out to be something else entirely. For a lot of them, it only took a few weeks to realize this wasn't the place to build a future. Some stuck around for a month, maybe two. Others didn't even make it that far. They'd come in fired up, eager to impress, and then slowly, the light goes out. The long hours, the yelling, the stress, it wore them down. They stopped showing up. Or worse, they stayed and started slipping, which was never tolerated for long. The turnover was constant, and it chipped away at everything: teamwork, quality, trust. The shop wasn't just losing people, it was losing its heart. But the biggest gut punch didn't come from a random crew member. It came from Chip Foose, the guy Boyd had mentored, trusted, and built some of his best cars with. Chip wasn't just an employee, he was family. His smooth designs and creative ideas helped define what people thought of as Boyd style. Things had been getting tense between them for a while. Boyd, feeling threatened as Chip's star started rising, began shooting down his designs for no clear reason. He'd ask for changes that didn't make sense, then complain about the result. Behind closed doors, he started bad-mouthing Chip, making people question his skills and loyalty. It all exploded during a big project. No one really knows what was said, but the yelling could be heard all over the shop. A few days later, Chip was out, gone. And he didn't just leave. He took everything with him: the talent, the designs, the client relationships, and a huge chunk of Boyd's reputation. This wasn't just about business. It hurt. Boyd felt betrayed by someone he'd brought up from nothing. Chip felt used and tossed aside after years of doing the heavy lifting, while Boyd took the credit. That split? It never healed. Chip didn't waste any time either. He started Foose Design, then landed his own show, Overhaulin'. And the vibe couldn't have been more different. American Hot Rod was all stress and screaming. Overhaulin' was chill, creative, and full of teamwork. The best people in the industry started flocking to Chip, many of them ex-Boyd employees who'd had enough of the drama. Boyd watched all this unfold with a growing mix of anger and bitterness. His former right-hand man had become his biggest competition, building exactly the kind of workplace people wished Boyd's had been. Back in Boyd's garage, things just got worse. Deadlines were missed. Quality dipped. Clients started complaining. People were exhausted and rushing through builds just to keep up with the pace of the show. The amazing craftsmanship Boyd was known for was slipping fast under the weight of all the pressure. The show was still on, but it didn't feel real anymore. The cool, off-the-cuff moments were gone. What was left felt forced, like they were faking drama to get views instead of actually building cool stuff. Boyd wasn't the same either. The stress, the betrayals, the pressure, it all got to him. He became harder, angrier, and obsessed with control. The passion that once drove his art turned into something darker. Behind the shiny cars and TV stardom, everything was falling apart. And the worst part? He was pushing away the very people who helped build his success in the first place. Then, in February 2008, everything came to a sudden stop. Boyd went in for what should have been a routine surgery and didn't make it out. He was just 63. The news rocked the car world. But inside his shop, the reaction was quiet. The man who had run everything was gone. And what was left was a shell of a place, running on fear more than anything else. The show ended. The stress evaporated. Workers stood around, unsure if they even had jobs, staring at half-finished builds they'd poured months into. No one really knew what to do next. Boyd's empire died with him. The garage doors closed, the machines went silent, and the place that had once been alive with creativity and chaos became a time capsule, one that still held the truth about what chasing perfection had cost him. But while the world mourned, something odd was happening behind the scenes at Boyd's once legendary garage. The sealed tomb. The place used to be alive, full of the grind of metal, the hiss of welding torches, the rumble of engines. Now, nothing. Just silence. Boyd's shop, once the heart of the custom car world, looked like it had been frozen in time. The parking lot, where celebrities and TV crews used to fight for space, was empty. Cracked pavement, weeds growing through, not a soul in sight. For 6 years, nobody touched it. After Boyd passed, the legal drama kicked off almost immediately. His family and old business partners were at each other's throats over what belonged to whom. Creditors swooped in fast, filing claims on everything from half-built hot rods to the custom tools Boyd had spent his life collecting. The Discovery Channel quietly killed American Hot Rod. A bunch of episodes never even aired. But all that legal mess wasn't even the wildest part. What hit the hardest was how everything he built was just left. Expensive projects, some worth hundreds of thousands, were abandoned mid-build. Parts that had been ordered months earlier kept showing up, only to be turned away at the door. Phones rang off the hook, collectors desperate for answers until the lines were finally cut off. And then the rumors started. People in the custom car world whispered all kinds of things. That Boyd had locked away secret designs that could have changed the game. There was a hidden safe in his office stuffed with cash from celebrity clients who didn't want their names tied to their cars. Some said there were deals worth millions that died with him, or prototype builds that only existed in pieces, buried in unmarked crates. Even the building itself started to feel like a mystery. Surveillance cameras still blinked above the doors. No trespassing signs popped up everywhere. Old employees drove by sometimes, but nobody dared get too close. The shop, once a symbol of American car culture at its peak, now just gave people the creeps. It wasn't a garage anymore. It felt more like a graveyard for forgotten dreams. Locals would gather now and then near the fence, peeking through the chain link, trying to see if anything had changed. The windows didn't show much, just darkness. People said there were at least 7 unfinished builds still inside. One of them, a roadster, had been promised to a collector in Monaco. No one knew what happened to it, or to the others. Had they been ruined by time? Were they still waiting, half-built and gathering dust? Season after season, the place just sat there. Spring rains leaked through holes in the roof, dripping onto polished metal. The summer heat warped old workbenches. Winter froze paint right off the walls, where dusty plaques still hung, celebrating a time that felt more and more like ancient history. By 2014, most people had stopped talking about the garage. Boyd's name still meant something in collector circles, and his old shows ran on TV every now and then. His custom wheels were still a big deal at car meets. But the shop? That place had turned into a time capsule. The car world moved on. New builders took the spotlight. New shows popped up. Styles changed. The scene evolved in ways Boyd probably never imagined. But his old shop stayed the same, locked up, untouched, and full of secrets. And here's the strange part. Nothing inside had been touched. Normally, when a business like this closes, you'd see auctions or estate sales. But not here. The place was exactly how Boyd left it. Coffee mugs are still on the counter. Work orders were still tacked to the board. Desks full of notes, pens, random personal stuff, all of it collecting dust. It wasn't planned that way. The mess of lawsuits and ownership fights meant nobody was allowed to move a thing. But the result? It was like someone hit pause on the last day of Boyd's life. A snapshot frozen in time. While the rest of the industry kept moving forward, Boyd's world was stuck sealed behind locked doors, slowly being forgotten. Until suddenly, it wasn't. When those doors finally swung open, what people found inside turned everything upside down. For a guy who built his whole image around being open and on camera, The stuff he left behind was nothing like what fans thought they knew. Turns out, the real story wasn't in the cars he built on screen. It was in the secrets he left behind. And when they finally came to light, they shook the entire car world to its core. In 2014, everything changed when a private collector gained access and discovered what Boyd had been hiding. What they found will haunt you. The guy who bought Boyd's old garage thought he was stepping into a piece of car history. What he got instead felt more like walking into a crime scene, except the only thing killed was a dream that never got to finish what it started. The moment those giant garage doors creaked open for the first time in 6 years, it was like cracking open a tomb. Stale air came pouring out, thick with the smell of old motor oil, rust, and something else. Maybe decay. Sunlight streamed in through the cracks, and suddenly it was like the place was on stage again. But everything inside was frozen in time. 7 hot rods, all half-finished, sat exactly where they'd been left. Some were nothing more than metal frames welded to custom chassis. Others were dangerously close to being done. There was a '32 Ford Roadster already in primer, but its engine was missing. A chopped coupe showed off gorgeous metalwork, but inside, just bare wires and an empty shell. And that was just the surface. The workbenches still held tools that looked like someone had just stepped away mid-job. One had a piece of aluminum clamped in place, halfway shaped into a fender. Welding torches were still hooked up, like the crew had gone on a break and never came back. The offices were where things started getting dark. Piles of paperwork showed the business had been in way worse shape than anyone knew. There were unpaid invoices shoved into folders, some going back years. Tax letters had been balled up and tossed into corners. Bank statements showed account after account overdrawn in the months leading up to Boyd's death. Even more personal were the things tucked away in drawers. Bottles of prescription meds, doctor's appointment cards, all hinting at serious health issues Boyd never talked about publicly. It painted a picture of a man who wasn't just battling business problems, he was dealing with a body that was breaking down at the same time. Then came the eerie stuff. Hidden under stacks of old car magazines were handwritten notes, angry, paranoid ones. Lists of employees he didn't trust anymore, names scribbled and scratched out over and over. One scrap of paper just had the word "betrayed" written again and again, like something out of a psychological thriller. In a cabinet, the collector found a bunch of rolled-up blueprints, but these weren't your typical hot rod sketches. They were futuristic. One even showed a hybrid system with electric motors built into a classic V8 setup. Another had a retractable hardtop idea that wouldn't hit the market for years after. Boyd had been way ahead of his time, but none of it ever saw the light of day. Then there was Boyd's private space, his hideaway. It was small, kind of like a bunker, but you could tell it was important to him. Photos of his best builds were everywhere, but some had been scratched out or marked up. Trophies were shoved in boxes or turned upside down. Whatever pride he'd once had was gone. On the desk sat a leather-bound journal, still open. The handwriting was tight and messy, filled with thoughts that felt heavy and desperate. Sleepless nights. Projects are spiraling out of control. Friendships falling apart. His final entry, written just weeks before he died, said he knew the end was near and that there was nothing he could do to stop it. And maybe the biggest shock was there was no stash of hidden money, no big payoffs, no secret deals, just more debts, more mess. He'd been using money from new jobs to finish old ones, classic robbing Peter to pay Paul. The whole thing was barely holding together. The garage wasn't just a place where cars got built. It had become a symbol of how chasing perfection can completely wreck you if you're not careful. Every abandoned build, every unpaid bill, every scribbled-out name was a piece of the puzzle. As the collector stood there, surrounded by everything Boyd had left behind, one thing was painfully clear. The guy who'd built some of the most incredible cars the world had ever seen had been living in chaos behind the scenes. And nobody knew it until now. But the most shocking discovery wasn't what Boyd left behind. It was how he financed his empire of lies. An empire built on lies. The stuff they found in Boyd's office told a story no one had ever seen on TV. One folder, labeled Urgent Do Not File, held the worst of it. Inside were loan papers showing Boyd had used the same unfinished car to borrow money from multiple lenders. That 1932 Ford Roadster sitting half-built in the garage? He'd promised it to 3 different collectors. Each one thought they were getting the one and only. And he'd already taken over $400,000 in down payments for cars that barely even existed, just rusted frames and sketches. The lies went way deeper than anyone expected. Vendor bills showed Boyd had been playing financial whack-a-mole for nearly 10 years, using money from new clients to pay off old ones. And he kept promising delivery dates that he had no way of meeting. Chrome guys, engine builders, upholstery experts, they were all strung along. Some had been waiting more than 5 years to get paid for work they'd already finished. Then they found this small notebook he'd kept hidden in his desk. Inside were 2 sets of numbers for every build, one real, one fake. One showed how much stuff actually cost and how behind schedule things really were. The other was what he told clients and the TV crew. And the difference between the two? It got bigger every year. A car, he said, cost $50,000, had eaten up over $200,000 in parts and labor. That TV show, the one that made him a household name, ended up boxing him in. The deadlines were brutal. They wanted picture-perfect builds, finished yesterday. And to keep up, he started cutting corners and hiding the chaos from the cameras and from the clients. Internal emails showed he'd clashed with the network a bunch of times over missed deadlines and busted budgets. They even threatened to cancel the show more than once. He'd end up making wild promises just to keep them happy. Digging deeper, they found letters from former employees talking about bounced paychecks and suddenly canceled health insurance. Some of the same people who helped make Boyd a legend were left having to file claims just to get paid. The loyalty in his shop had crumbled under the weight of money problems and broken trust. But what really hit hard were the letters from customers, people who had handed Boyd their life savings, trusting him to build their dream cars. One older guy had written a bunch of times about a roadster he'd commissioned for his 50th wedding anniversary. Each letter got sadder. Another had sunk his entire retirement into a car that never made it past the frame. And it wasn't just about the unfinished cars piling up in the shop. In the final months before he died, Boyd had started making some desperate moves, quiet ones, behind the scenes. He began secretly selling off pieces of his company, not just to one investor, but to several. And here's the kicker. Each one thought they were getting something exclusive. They believed they were buying the rights to his name, his designs, his legacy. But Boyd was making the same promises to all of them, over and over again. On paper, it looked like he was selling the same business multiple times. To each investor, it felt like a golden opportunity. But in reality, it was a ticking time bomb. By the time anyone figured it out, the paperwork was a disaster. Contracts overlapped, ownership claims clashed, and everyone was lawyering up. Sorting through who actually owned what wasn't just complicated, it was a total mess. That one decision to stay afloat a little longer ended up creating a legal nightmare that would drag on for years. One of the creepiest discoveries was on his old office computer. There were a bunch of draft emails he never sent. In them, Boyd admitted everything to his family, friends, and clients. He said he knew he'd messed up and he was sorry for the fallout. But he never hit send. Those messages just sat there, unread, until someone booted up the computer years later. The most personal thing they found was a spiral notebook under a pile of unpaid bills. His handwriting, usually bold and sharp, was all shaky and small. He wrote about not being able to sleep, about keeping secrets, about watching everything fall apart while still pretending everything was fine. It was heartbreaking. Boyd's reputation in the car world had been built on pure talent and vision. That part was real. He was the guy who could make steel and chrome into something magical. But the business side, it had been a disaster for a long time. Every award, every big-name client, every episode of the show had been held together by borrowed time and borrowed money. By the time it all came to light, the numbers were brutal. Boyd's estate owed over $3 million to everyone from big suppliers to guys who'd welded frames in his shop. The truth was, the company had been broke for the last 5 years of his life. Boyd didn't die on top of the world. He died carrying the weight of a collapsing empire, one he kept afloat for as long as he could, just to keep the illusion alive. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Also, check out another interesting video by clicking on the video shown on your screen. See you on the other side.